Hey guys, FilthyRobot here. Doing a guide video. I haven't done a guide video in a while, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how I approach character creation in D&D, and then use a specific character that I've built to kind of provide examples of that in practice. So let's start with kind of where I start when I build a character. So the first thing I do when I build a character is I start with a core mechanical interaction that I'm interested in, and I know I can feel it. I can feel the the uprising of uh, resistance to that idea on the viewers right now, because I hear a lot. You need to start with a role play idea, and I disagree with that pretty adamantly, and here's why. So the thing about role playing a character and adding a personality to a character is it's independent of mechanical stuff. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the mechanics of your character are. You can put any personality you want over that. If my character is good at combat, he could still be a jovial or easygoing or a total asshole or childlike or naive or whatever you want. It doesn't matter. If my character is a good spellcaster, he could still be any of those things I've said. If my character is good at absorbing damage, he can still be any of those things. For me, the mechanics are nearly totally independent of the role playing. I can overlay any personality I want over any mechanical chassis and not have an issue. And what I want when I build a character is I want to be engaged by my character on as many levels as possible. I want an interesting personality, but I can have an interesting personality on any different class that I want or any different set of mechanics that I want. But I also want to have, for me, interesting mechanics, stuff that makes me feel either powerful or cool, or of like that I have a ton of options, or something along the lines that lets me feel like my character is doing something that I find enjoyable in the game, on a mechanical level as well as a personality level. If your game doesn't involve skill tests, where you're not ever having combat and you're never having skill rolls, then maybe it's not important. The mechanics perhaps don't matter whatsoever. But most of the games that I've played now of D&D, mechanical interactions show up somewhere, either in lots of skill tests or in combat or in both. And I would like to have a character who's focused on doing something mechanically, often multiple things mechanically that are synergetic, and often as a part of a team that also does things mechanical things synergetically, because that's the type of stuff that I enjoy out of games. I enjoy finding the ways to do things well. And I want to add that you can't really break D&D unless you're being an asshole or your DM isn't very good, or both. Because the world is a world that is created, and it's created by another conscious entity that has the full knowledge of your character available to them. You can't hide your character's abilities from your DM. Your DM A sees your sheet whenever they want, and B, you have to get approval from your DM to have your character in the first place. And any DM worth anything is going to have looked at your character sheet, looked at what your character's done, understood what it's trying to do, and can work with that. If your character's really, really good at hitting things, like imagine I see complaints sometimes about like Great Weapon Master or Polearm Mastery or Sharpshooter or this type of stuff, right? If your character is mechanically good at shooting things, the DM can build a world in which that doesn't break it. And if it's problematic, like for example, if you are really, really good at combat and your teammates are really, really bad at combat, the DM's having a hard time balancing encounters because of that, communication fixes that. Your DM can come talk to you and be like, talk to you guys as a group. Are you okay with, are you okay with Filthy being amazing at combat and you guys not being so good? And if the answer is no, then you guys can work that out. You can change things. The DM can change things on the fly behind the scenes as well if they want to do that. Although some people find that a little bit gamey. But having DM'd a couple times myself now, I like giving my players the chance for their characters to shine doing something that they built their characters to do. That's cool. It's cool for all of us. And I can balance a encounter where that doesn't ruin what I'm trying to do. So a lot of that seems to be communication based when I see people complain about overpowered stuff. Now, maybe there's some stuff that's kind of borderline broken, like a coffee lock comes to mind. I think if I had a player who was like, I want to play a coffee lock for this character, for this game, and I'd be like, well, look, we're part of this part of this campaign, or part of this one-off is about limited resources, and you're really finding kind of a loophole in the rules to break the limited resource thing. I'm going to need you to either do something different, or I'm going to have to put some artificial limitations on top of that. Once you played a couple games and you start working with reasonable people, you realize that most people are there to enjoy the experience. And if that breaks it, if it breaks the entire experience for all the rest of the players, that this one person is enjoying their character and they don't have any uh, shame about that or any willingness to compromise about that, it just may not be the type of person you want to play with. Most of us in the group that I'm playing with have got to the point where we often limit our characters deliberately by trying to, often from an RP reason, to make it keep the game interesting, so that we're not just running away with something. That, yeah, we can make mistakes, or yeah, we see things wrong, because it's kind of fun to roll with that and where it goes. All right, so the first thing for me is pick a mechanical element of that, because I can build any personality I want, and the mechanical stuff should be fun as well. The second thing that I do when I build characters is I want to be aware of the environment as much as I can and who my teammates are going to be. And the second one a little bit more important than the first one. I don't mean aware is my environment like I'm going to be fighting lava beasts, so I need to be resistant to fire. Sure, for a one-off, it would annoy the hell out of me if I were a ranger and I had to guess what my favorite enemies were going to be, because it's a one-off and your character's never likely going to be used again, and the whole point of having abilities like that is you get to use them from time to time. But in general, I don't mean that when I say I'd be aware of your environment. I mean be aware of the type of campaign you're going to be playing in, the expectations of the other players, the expectation of the DM, and what that means on your character building. If you have issues with your character, ask your DM. Be like, hey, like I would really like to use, for example, there's often a rule, I think it's an Adventure League rule, where you only pick stuff from up to 2 books. And maybe I think it's the primary, the PHB, the Player's Handbook, and 1 additional book. And this character I'm going to show you uses stuff from 3 books. It's very easy to clear that with your DM. Be like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. This is why I've done it. I don't think it's broken or overpowered, but it is using stuff outside the general rule set in terms of I'm pulling from 3 published books as opposed to 2 published books. Is that okay? 99% of the time, sure, no problem. Or, yeah, okay, but you need to do this in response. That stuff's fine. So first is environment. Second is teammates. I think this is really important in large part for personality, but I think it's also slightly important for classes, but probably more so for personality. So I know two of the players I'm going to be playing this next campaign with. Adam and Kevin both are unable to continue for various reasons. So we are moving on as Joe and Ribs, Dolphin Chemist, and myself. And I know what characters both Joe and Ribs and Dolphin are likely to be playing in the next campaign. And I understand their personalities, having played with them a couple times now. Not Dolphin and Steve's personalities, but their character personalities that they're playing with. And their characters are fairly indecisive or not interested in making decisions, and are often easily distracted by things in the moment. They're fun characters to roleplay. They make me and them and our audience presumably laugh, and they do silly things, and we get to create situations that wouldn't arise if the characters weren't like that. But for me, one of the things I would like is our campaign, our adventure, our larger goals to progress as well. And if I built a character with a similar mindset to their characters, I don't think we would progress very often, because I think we would become lost in the minutia of the stuff around us in those moments, which can be fun, but I have a secondary goal of wanting to see progression in our campaign. So part of when I designed the personality of this character is I designed a character with a little bit more of a decisive personality, because I wanted to have something that fit the team I was playing with, so that we can still enjoy each other's characters and each other's characters' personalities, but also so the stuff that I wanted to get happen was going to be met. So that's another thing I think about when I build these characters is who am I playing with and what are they playing? And it's harder when you're playing with total strangers. You often don't know. And it's weird sometimes when we play one-offs with people who we haven't played with before, and their character motivations are totally opposite our character motivations. And everyone has to kind of do a little bit of like, we'll just ignore the fact that these characters would never actually travel together. So it's better when you know what you're getting into and building it to fix that. Okay, so I want to apply these two fairly simple rules to an actual character, the character that I want to play in this game. Talk a little bit about where my idea came from and how I set it up. So for me, when I look at characters, especially when I haven't built one in a while, I go through and read a bunch of, especially the newer classes that are coming out from time to time, the newer rule sets, the newer books, the newer spells. I'm looking for things that stand out as something unique, powerful, different, weird, stuff like that. The stuff that really stands out is interesting to me, and then I try to build with that. I mean, some of the examples, let me give you some other examples of things I've played around with. I've played around with lots of feats. I've played around with lots of multi-classing stuff. I've played around with some of the really cool class abilities, like the rogue AoE evasion and the rogue single target evasion, like monk, the mass monk saving throw stuff. I've played around with stacking concentration saves and having multiple concentrations, like on sorcerers, and just stuff like this. This stuff interests me. They're mechanics that are synergetic, that do cool things from that. this one in particular that caught my eye as I was building this is I wanted to play a paladin. I've never played a paladin, and I've always wanted to. I kind of hate the RP that generally goes with paladin, but more on that later. But I like smite. I think it's a cool mechanic. I like a pretty reasonably health pointed class like the paladins with a D10. I like the idea of heavy armor. I think that's kind of cool. And I like the idea of, I like gishes. I like these partial melee, partial caster classes. I think there's a lot of options that can do a lot of cool things. So I was interested in playing that. The paladin checked all those boxes. I hadn't played it. Kevin just left, and Kevin was playing a really, really cool, really well acted, really interesting paladin of a nice strong class. And I didn't want to just duplicate that. So I wanted to do something a little bit different if I could. And one of the things that kept catching my eye was Kevin's aura in our last game was super powerful. That was the resist aura that he gets from being a paladin, right? Gets all of his teammates and him around him get a saving throw buffing aura within 10 feet of him. And auras sounded kind of cool. I like that. It helps the team. It's a passive, so it's not like you're using a concentration or something for that. And it has a really impactful, interesting effect. It makes you, and that one makes you less able to be overwhelmed by some of these extra ways that you get attacked. So I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. What else can the paladins do like that? And I kind of was looking through, and there's a lot of cool auras in there. But there's a really cool aura in the ancients, the ancient paladin aura. And this one is a aura that makes you have resistance to damage from spells and your teammates in that area. Well, that's pretty cool because a lot of times the stronger enemies AoE your team. And it's very difficult to spread out versus enemies in a game like this, just especially if you're melee characters. So I'm like, that's kind of cool. I can be a melee character and not have to be worried about being clumped up with my teammates and have incentive. I'm already incentivized to stand near my teammates for aura, for the first aura. And this is now a second aura that both protects my teammates if they do that and incentivizes me to stand near them. I like that. And then as I started looking through the races that could go with it, I can build a slightly less than optimal stat distribution. In other words, I don't get quite as many stat points where I'd like them to be, but I can build a character that has inherent advantage on saving throws versus magic. I'm like, cool. So now I've got a character that can in large part not disregard, but is going to be much more resistant to the negative effects of spells, either damage or the chance of them actually influencing them, and confers a lot of that to their teammates. So that's pretty cool. And then I started thinking, well, what would that be like? What would that be like? And I'm like, and for me, I often go to fiction for my motivation for these characters. And one of the fictional characters that kind of really stood out when I started thinking about that is Karsa Orlong, I think the name is. And that's from the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And he is essentially a giant warrior from a tribe that's kind of caught in the past a little bit, a rural tribe caught in the past that comes out raiding every so often. And he is unconsciously resistant to magic, does a lot of like a mage throws like a magical net over him, and he just runs through it despite that not really being physically possible in that world through nearly sheer willpower. Now, granted, there's other things fueling that in the book, but the idea is basically he ignores magic because he just gets so annoyed about it and like runs through it. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then I'm like, I need a character. I want to play a paladin, and I wanted to get away. My default characterization of characters tends to be probably like neutral, like true neutral, or maybe chaotic neutral. And I kind of wanted to play a character that was not as evil, perhaps, but not a goody two-shoe paladin. The goody two-shoe paladins, I just find the idea of being that restricted in my character decisions to be really boring. So how do I do that with the paladin? This became an interesting puzzle for me. I'm like, okay, I've got the pieces that I want. I like the mechanics of the paladin. I like the idea of the group synergy of the paladin. I have a race that makes interesting synergies with this as well. Well, how do I get around the fact that paladins are inherently boring for me to roleplay them? Well, I thought about it and I came up with the idea, well, these are subjective things. Like even the rules for this character, the tenets of the paladin's oath, kindle the light, shelter the light, preserve your light. Well, these are subjective. When you look at what they mean, they talk a lot about views. They can be interpreted in light of what these mean to you, the views, the deeper meanings of these views mean to you. And I kind of hit on the idea, well, what if my god is a kind of a more like an older god, a more basic primal god than a refined kind of helper of the poor kind of god, right? What if the god that I worshipped was like a blood god or a storm god? And I was thinking like old world, like fickle storm god, that part of the worship of the storm god was like human sacrifice. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is suddenly interesting. What does it mean to a paladin who was brought up with those values to kindle the light, shelter the light, and preserve your light? Suddenly it's different. So that became a way for me to step outside the kind of boring confines for me of like a pure, like good paladin. And I'm like, okay, now this is all coming together nicely. And it also fixes the Yuan-Ti issue. The Yuan-Ti, one of the things with Yuan-Ti is it's like they're devoid of emotion. I'm like, devoid of emotion? I'm like, really? I want to roleplay long-term a character that's devoid of emotion? That doesn't sound very fun. That sounds like, it's like if you were to roleplay like quietly competent. If you're just like the quiet strong man over in the corner. Well, that's all good and well in theory, and maybe that works okay in like video or like movie or something. But when you're role playing in a game with other strong personalities and big personalities, if your character is quiet all the time, it's just gonna look like you're not role playing. You might be the best role player ever of a guy who's quietly strong in the corner, and no one will ever see it or pay any attention to it, and it will look like you're just playing poorly in that moment. So how do I get a personality that also fits in, that also fits with this? And I'm like, well, one of the ways I could do that is by lore. I can build the character. I can build the lore that my character came from. So for me, why does this character I'm playing have a strong personality? Because part of the indoctrination, part of the creation of a paladin in this order is that a part of the personality of the god is actually imparted on the paladin. Now I have a reason why my Yuan-Ti snake man, emotionless snake man, is instead having lots of emotions written bold, which is what I want my character to be for this particular character. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more about the synergies, the actual mechanical synergies of this, and then I will call it a video. So I ended up going with a Warlock 1 Paladin X build. When I multi-class Paladin, it forces me to take 13 Strength as a requirement to get in and out of Paladin. Which is a little bit annoying because ideally I think this character, if you build it, you can build it one of two ways. I think you can build it half health with pure dex and not multi-class paladin. You lose access to a little bit of your AC and a little bit of your spell versatility, but you make up for that in the progression through the character levels. But for me, I wanted to do just this real fleshed out concept idea. So for me, I ended up doing Paladin 1 or Warlock 1 Paladin X with Yuan-Ti. For the reasons I've already talked about Yuan-Ti, I find dark vision really important, and I really wanted to try to play around with this idea of someone who is basically contemptuous of enemy magic and has reason to be so, and that sounded really fun to me. I really like the single attribute dependency that I get from this build. Because I go Hexblade 1, my attack rolls, both attack damage and attack accuracy, are based on charisma. Because I'm a paladin, all my spell casting is based on a charisma, and my aura power is based on charisma, the amount of saving I get out of that. So it becomes single attribute charisma, basically. I do have to make some concessions here, unfortunately. I have a floating attribute point, which always drives me nuts. And I also I have to minimize dex and intelligence and wisdom to do this. I do get some of that returned, since wisdom is one of the saving throws that paladins and warlocks both have proficiency in. So I get that a little bit back. The aura makes up for some of that, especially since my aura will be maxed. It will be a +5 as opposed to the +3 that most strength or dex-based paladins will be getting, since I am charisma-based, which is nice. And I make up for that a little bit by the fact that I convey these bonuses to my teammates, even though it makes my individual strength a little bit worse. I do get to run plate. I like the tanking role. I like being in the thick of things. I like it that the enemies hit me and I'm still standing, or I can shrug it off, or this type of stuff. It makes for a fun character to play for that type of thing for me. So I like the fact that I get to wear plate. And I figure if I've already invested 13 strength to be able to multi-class, I'm putting 2 more in to get the plate armor, which doesn't cost me constitution or charisma. It just costs me my secondary stats. Is palatable, even if I'm not super excited about it. I like the expanded spell list. I do like Gish characters. The combination of a melee character plus a spellcaster is really fun for me. And the paladins get to do that. And Smite is great. Smite has a nice combination with Hexblade's Curse. Hexblade Curse lets me crit on a 19 or a 20. And then I can Smite on a critical to get double dice rolls off Smite, which is nice. The spell list really goes up when you're doing this. Because you get a point in Warlock, you get some base warlock spells, and because you are a hexblade, you have access to the shield spell, which is super good for someone standing in the front line, standing at point blank range. So you get a little bit increased both number of spells from the way that warlock multiclassing works. Unlike other multiclassing, you actually get an additional spell slot too for being a warlock, because it is a pact magic spell slot as opposed to a caster level spell slot, which is kind of cool. I get a little bit of short rest stuff back, which is nice, which means I can be, because I have that warlock slot and that recharges on a short rest, I can be a little bit more free to cast level 1s. For me, that means I tend to hoard resources, so it's really, really nice to feel like I can spend this, especially for granted only level 1 spells right now, but especially for out of combat spell casting. As I roleplay more, as I get more into D&D and play this more, I like the flexibility of being able to spend limited resources for fun story ways as opposed to just in combat. So I like the approaching a scared villager who's telling a story and casting heroism on them, so that to fight their fear, to basically come by, and just by my presence there and some of my magic instill strength into them and bravery into them so they can talk about that. And I like not having to feel like I am wasting valuable resources to do that. I also get some range spells with Toll the Dead and Eldritch Blast, which is nice for Paladin, so if I'm out of position, I can still do something. I like that my spellcasting ability is also charisma based, so my attack rolls on spells aren't terrible, especially since I'm maxing that out. All in all, it has a lot of synergy, which makes me really, really happy. It has some good teammate stuff, which makes me happy, and it has a well fleshed out mechanical and personality driven set of things layered over top of it. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had in this character. The character's designed to be an old world knight of a god whose influence has waned and who has been around for a very, very extreme period of time, who loses some of the memories of this, but still has these kind of driving personality traits that maybe are not appropriate anymore for the world in which he's in, which makes for fun interactions. I get to do strange things in weird moments and take weird stances or weird sides of arguments or decisions in a way that I find fun and engaging while still having a mechanically interesting character. So this is what I've ended up with. My character's name is Yugen. I hope to be playing this character or a character very similar to this in the next campaign I play. I will be playing with Dolphin and Joe and Ribs. We're not entirely certain who our DM is going to be. We're doing some DM tryouts the next couple weeks, and we're not entirely certain who our last player is going to be. We have a couple people we've asked, and we'll see if schedules work out or not. Hopefully they will. Anyways, so this is my first attempt at talking about the D&D character that I'm playing, talking a little bit about my mentality when selecting these. I'm happy to hear feedback. I'm sure there's a number of topics I didn't get to for this, but this video is going kind of long already, and I want to wrap it up while I still have some driving focus on it as opposed to just touching around all the other things. I'm happy to talk D&D with any of you guys who are interested. You can always find that we have a D&D channel in Discord. Special shout out to Donald Trump, who I've spent hours and hours with building characters and talking D&D stuff and had a blast doing it. One of my long-term viewers and friends, and you guys are invited to be part of that conversation if you're interested. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this was fun for you. I had a lot of fun talking about it and felt inspired to make the videos, so it's always nice when that happens. Talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.